Hello and welcome to EDUCAUSE Self Talk. Today we're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics here. It is the 2024 Teaching and Learning Horizon Report. My name is Jenay Robert. I'm one of the senior researchers here at EDUCAUSE who works on the Horizon Report, and I am joined by my friends and colleagues, Kathe and Ryan. Do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathe Pelletier. I'm the director of the Teaching and Learning program, and I get to contribute to the Horizon Report by shepherding the expert panel and reviewing the exemplars, which are the projects that everyone loves to look at about the new and innovative and boundary-pushing things that folks are doing on campus, and work with my researcher colleagues.
Awesome. Yep, I'm Ryan. I am Associate Director of Professional Learning here at EDUCAUSE. So involvement with the Horizon Report is a little bit from the side, sort of. So I'm not involved in the creation of the report per se, although sometimes I have the opportunity to give some feedback. However, work with our members a lot on how it's applied. We use it in a lot of our learning programs as a resource. And then we also work with a lot of the folks that are on the panel, tend to be some of our faculty or our members or things like that. So it's a really nice resource for us, and also something that we can help inform, which is pretty fun. I am going to start us off with a question that's not about the report per se, because I think it would be helpful for folks, including me. But Jenay and Kathe, you both have done training in foresight work, which is what the report is using, and you all use it in all the other reports. I haven't done the formal training, but I've kind of scratched the surface. I'm like, I know just enough to be dangerous with foresight, so I got to be careful with it. So I was wondering if the two of you could give a little overview of just what foresight is and how it's used in the reports before we dive into the details.
Yeah, I can jump in, and then Kathe for sure would love to hear kind of your take on strategic foresight. Strategic foresight is a research approach, the research methodology that honestly I wasn't very familiar with until I started working at EDUCAUSE, and it's been great fun to learn this new research approach and apply it to projects. So essentially, strategic foresight looks at data about our current day state, specifically in the way you see it represented in the Horizon Report. We look at large-scale trends that fall into 5 categories: social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. And we think specifically about how those large trends impact the area of interest that we're studying. For us, it's always higher education and the intersection of higher education and technology. And then we use tools to consider how those trends and other signals of potential change may all interact and create change over the next, in the case of the Horizon Report, 10 years. It's important to really emphasize the fact that strategic foresight is not a prediction tool. We're not trying to see into the future. There's no crystal ball. That's why what you see in the Horizon Report is 4 distinct scenarios that represent potential futures. So what these tools help us do is think about the multitude of potential futures that we have maybe lying before us. And then the action that follows that strategic thinking is, what do we do to impact the future in the way we want to and to create the future we want to see? So that's my slightly longer than elevator pitch about strategic foresight.
And you did a great job of describing foresight and how we use it for the Horizon Report. One of the things that I will really underscore is that last point that Jenay made, that it's not about predicting the future. And I really love the scenarios because they're these provocative stories, but they're also grounded in the data that the panelists are providing to us about the trends they're seeing that are happening right now. And the provocation really is to not just imagine those 4 possible futures, which are kind of these extreme scenarios of growth and transformation and constraint and collapse, and even those titles signify this like grand events happening. But it really kind of stokes the imagination, to kind of provoke that reaction of, oh, but that would be an amazing future, or, oh man, no way, that's so scary. What if higher education goes away completely and all of our colleges and universities close, and that would be terrible. And so the provocation is around action. What can we do right now that will influence the way the future unfolds? And it's that agency, I think, that that I'm not sure that all of our readers really understand, that we are in charge of our own futures, and these stories and the trends and the technologies and practices that we highlight in the Horizon Report are mechanisms for us to imagine what might be, but we ultimately are responsible for what will be. So it always gives me goosebumps when I think about that aspect of foresight, that it's such an amazing tool for action, and it gives us that agency.
I love the way that you said that, and I'm going to now rephrase it and butcher it, but you were so eloquent. You said something like that, the Horizon Report helps us think about what could be, and we're responsible for what will be. And that's really a beautiful way to think about strategic foresight.
Was there a scenario or aspects of any of the scenarios that really are like sticking with you all as the report gets put together, and you've seen them all and you've spent time on the 4 of them? Because they are provocative, and they elicit response, like in those of us that have been in higher ed for a while. I mean, I unfortunately found myself drawn to the negative cases because they're very provocative, right? They're very like, holy cow, that would really uproot a lot of things. Maybe for better, maybe for worse, but was there a specific scenario or pieces of the informing futures work that really stuck out to the two of you?
I'll jump in. I actually was really drawn in by the transformation scenario this year. Sometimes, and so with transformation, it really is based in a fundamental shift that in the way that we think about things, or the kind of a paradigm shift that ultimately transforms, in this case, higher education. And what was interesting in this scenario, and I'm trying to think back to previous editions of the Horizon Report, so it may have just caught my eye this time, but higher education in this scenario had to almost collapse first before the transformation occurred. And the transformation in this particular scenario was that higher education ultimately became very hyper personalized and focused on kind of an agility related to skills, and helping individuals continue to reskill or upskill in that very personalized way. But the first part of the transformation scenario was the looming collapse and the economic constraints and the lack of perception of value of higher ed. And so that was really the impetus for that transformation. And so to me, that one, it was really thought-provoking, because I feel like, you look around you right now in higher ed and you do see some of the pinches of budget cuts and the workforce leaving higher ed or changing jobs or feeling dissatisfied or burnt out. And so there is this kind of that pressure that I think we feel, and we're seeing institutions close, et cetera. And so, to me, like, how can we avoid imminent, like, total collapse, but yet how do we leverage this energy around change to really look at what's important and pay attention to some of these other trends related to the need to I'll say the AI words. I know we'll talk about it soon, but the need to address the AI, or the need to help our students and learners not only gain the right skills that are going to be critical in the workforce now, but have a way to continue to stay on top of the skills that they'll need through their lifetime. And that requires so much change in the way that we currently do higher ed. And so can we start now on thinking about what that transformation might look like in baby steps, so that change doesn't happen all at once. So what can we do right now that will start that momentum?
Yeah, I Well, first, a shout out to Mark McCormick, because the scenarios were written a little differently this time around, and I'm excited to see what the readers think of it. Each scenario doesn't normally start this way, but this year, for the first time, Mark crafted this beautiful little vignette, personalized story of a potential future student or person in higher ed. And I thought that really gave the scenarios new life. And he may have just, gotten himself on the hook to write these forever and ever because he did such a great job. But having said that, I think it was the constraint scenario, the one that was about the student has to like put their cell phone in a lockbox before they go in. And I think it resonated with me first because I'm just a big science fiction fan, and this felt kind of science fiction-y to me, but not in like an unrealistic way, in the way that science fiction is realistic, right? So the reason I love science fiction is because it gives you this glimpse into kind of an extreme version of the future that is completely plausible. That's what good, to me, really good science fiction does. And so that's what really resonated with me about that, was thinking about how it's entirely plausible that we have a future where there are extreme data restrictions and how we access the internet, and what we share and how we share it. Looking at the trends, thinking about our increased concerns about data privacy and security, and some of those more global trends that are impacting just the way we as individuals feel about sharing data and being in a globally connected digital world and protecting ourselves in that world. That really resonated with me as something that was quite plausible and a little disturbing, but also like, would it be so bad? Yeah, so it made me feel a lot of things, which I think is good.
Mm-hmm. That one hit me because it's actually what I think it's the closest scenario to business as usual today. Other than locking your phone in it, right? Then the faculty member, whatever in the vignette, goes into the classroom. Everyone gets out paper and pencil, or maybe a laptop, but it's not connected to the internet, right? And that's the one where like I could see our institutions today doing that. But I was really struck by like none of these scenarios is keep doing what we've been doing. Mm-hmm. But higher ed's pretty good at doing what we've been doing. And so I'm wondering, like, I was sitting with all four of these would be massive. And Kathe, you brought it up. All of them have this like fulcrum point that forces the change. And those really stuck out to me too, because I've wondered for years, like, what will be the thing that actually pushes higher ed to change, really change? And I thought COVID was going to be that. I thought COVID was going to do that for K-12 too. And I've actually been a little bit surprised at how we've kind of just gone back to 2019. Yes, there's some changes. And I think like, but in the teaching and learning world for a couple of years there, everyone was going to the teaching and learning experts. Everyone was leaning on those people. And I was talking to some members the other day and they said, yes, not really like that anymore. Our funding is being cut back. We had to get rid of some team members. It's like everyone's just, oh, okay, that's over. We move on. So that's not really a question for you all. I don't know if you have reactions or thoughts based on the report, but that was one thing that stuck out to me. All four of them were really interesting, but none of them were keep doing what we're doing today.
The interesting thing, about the prize report in general and in foresight work in general, but the scenarios maybe a little bit less so, but I guess in a very concrete way, it's really hard to think about the future, right? It's hard to imagine what life is going to be like in any domain in 10 years, right? And one of the exercises that we don't use in the prize report, but that is a part of the Institute for the Future toolkit, is called Look Back to Look Forward. And for that one, you look back. So you think about what your time horizon forward is. So in this case, it's 10 years. And then you look back twice that amount. So we would be looking at 20 years. And then you identify those fulcrum points or those milestones or those, introductions of new technologies or new social habits or, trends in that you can really see where they start or they start to pick up steam. And what that does is actually, it helps you to draw out this timeline of change. So you can see like, wow, it's only been X years since we've had iPhones, for example. And think about all that's changed since the introduction of the iPhone. And then you use that to imagine, well, looking from now, what might the next 10 years look like? And I do think if we did that exercise, we probably wouldn't want to do it for higher ed in general because that's so broad, but digital learning, for example, or artificial intelligence, I think we would see change that's happening. Even, your example of COVID, and it feels like we're kind of returning to normal. Well, yes, in some ways, but think of all the, hybrid programs that are now status quo, or everybody knows what high flex means now, and most people define it somewhat accurately. We could have said in 2019. And so I think that's another way that the scenarios really provide value, is that it does show us in almost a mundane way, like what would it look like if we didn't continue status quo, or some editions of the Horizon Report, there is a little bit more of that status quo, and like what would be the potential impact of status quo in the next 10 years, given the rest of these other trends, and maybe that's what actually leads to collapse, is that we don't change. And so you've got my mind swirling. What I'm also hearing your point to all of us who work in higher ed is that we must change, right? We must continue to innovate and push boundaries and think of new ways of doing things in better ways, and not just go back to 2019 or whatever it is, if we want to create a certain future that we think is the one.
And I think the trends show that change is happening. I think I say that in a way of like kind of pushing the button, but it doesn't happen as quickly as people wanted to sometimes, you say. But I will say that, like, in the trends in the report, students, like, people are voting with their feet, so to speak, at this point. And I do think it's pushing some interesting change and trends, like the public perception of the value of higher ed is declining. No one can ignore that. So I don't know, Jenay, if you have any, I don't know what you thought. I mean, you looked at the trends maybe deeper than than all of us, and Kathe got to hear it from people. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think thinking about this concept of the extent to which higher ed is changing versus staying the same is something that is a real topic of interest as I'm traveling and going to conferences and talking to my colleagues here at EDUCAUSE. Something that really stood out to me about this particular Horizon Report. So this Horizon Report was unique in a couple of different ways. One, obviously, AI everywhere. We've never before had a Horizon Report where there were AI trends nominated in every single category, or any type of trend nominated in every single type of category. So that was one. The other thing that's really interesting about this Horizon Report, relating to the conversation we were just having, is around the key technologies and practices section, where usually we have a mixture of specific technologies and specific practices. And this year we see all 6 of those elements really being practices. What does this mean? I mean, I can sort of be poetic about what it means, getting back to serving our students and refocusing on practices. But I think also it might be related to institutions realizing this need to really focus on their core mission in this hectic world that's changing so rapidly. And then I'm going to sort of babble here a little bit because these are not fully formed thoughts, but I will say, as a bit of a spoiler alert, I think a lot of what we've seen in the Horizon Report this year is going to loop us back to focusing on institutional resilience a little bit. And in the way that we see that when higher ed is in crisis or there's some major inflection point, we can get our act together and implement quick change to respond to what's happening around us. we're not so good at this like middle ground area of like the world is changing around us. We have a minute to think about it, but we just have a minute. We need to get this done. So in response to rapid proliferation of AI tools, in response to changing student demographics, in response to people really demanding, like you said, Ryan, with their feet, better, more flexible modalities and so forth. So if I were sitting at an institution right now, I would really be trying to think about how do our strategic processes need to change? How can we still safeguard the mission of our institution and be true to that mission, which is supporting students and all the things that we know and love about higher ed. But how do we get to move things a little bit quicker? Because the world is a lot faster paced than it was 50 years ago, even 10 years ago. And we need to be faster paced too to keep up with that. So I guess that kind of answers your question about thinking about changing and not changing. I think it's some of those core processes that we need to start thinking about.
One that gives me an opening to share a concept that I've been playing with, and that is digital transformation plus foresight equals institutional resilience. So the idea of digital transformation being strategic shifts to culture, workforce, and technology in order to transform your institutional value proposition and business process, et cetera. So that itself is a kind of a process, a digital transformation process or approach. But when you apply strategic foresight to that, foresight gives you, it kind of allows you to level up your DX initiatives because it is giving you that glimpse into possible futures and informing the actions you can take today, or informing the strategy, or informing that direction of those shifts in culture, workforce, and technology. And when you do those things together, digital transformation kind of bolstered by foresight, that results in a resilience in your institution's ability to buffet change. And but Jenay, what you said also made me really think about how we talk about institutional resilience. It's often in this kind of responsive way of something is happening externally and the institution is a bit able to, continue on or make a shift at that point, or essentially react. And what I would love to be able to, and I know that within the elements of institutional resilience, as EDUCAUSE is defining it, there is agility, there is creativity and flexibility, and a lot of the other elements of digital transformation, like cross-functional collaboration and inviting many voices, et cetera. But I would love for us to lean into the proactive aspect of institutional resilience. And again, the more we combine foresight with this idea of transformation or change, or, the desired result in resilience, I think that we can get to that proactive approach instead of just waiting for, and that's exactly the point you're making, I think, Jenay, like instead of just waiting for some big thing to happen like COVID or, something else. How can we simply create mechanisms to always be looking to the future and looking to innovate or change or refine or optimize or whatever that might be. And that is a muscle that we do not really exercise yet in higher education very well.
I think that might be a good segue to ask Ryan to talk a little bit about professional learning and how our members use the Horizon Report in their day-to-day work, which I'm more removed from that process than I would like to be. So I'd love to hear more about what you all do.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we try to do is point people to it. I do think there's opportunity though for people. Like actually one of the questions I was about to ask two of you is, how do you think people should use the scenarios? Because so I come from a background in management consulting in the corporate world, right? So I was in higher ed for a bit, then I did that for a bit. And in that, there was an overlap there with what they called scenario planning, which was kind of like foresight 1.0. I mean, I think it's also come along, but depending on what context you're in, you may hear both of those terms being tossed around. And one of the challenges of scenario planning in the corporate world was like, well, we can't plan and take action on both the entire system crumbling and us being bankrupt next year and us being the number one most innovative company and making billions of dollars. Like, how do we do that? And do we choose one? Do we take pieces from all of them, right? And so, and I don't know that there's ever a perfect answer. I think it depends on the context. It depends on the people. It depends on, like, you, for our membership, if you are a small community college in the East Coast of the US, you probably need to think about these scenarios differently than if you're a large R1 on the West Coast. You know what I mean? Like, so you have to, there isn't like this magic bullet per se in foresight. So I think in the professional learning world, what we try to do is let people work through the scenarios a little bit. So what's really fun is to say, okay, you read it, go talk about it, go find peers, go find other folks maybe at other institutions that you can dig into this and think about what the heck would that actually mean if it happened here, right? With our faculty, our students, what we have in front of us, what would that scenario look like? So that's one way we like to use it, because we do have that space. Like, we have our institute programs or our learning labs where we get, 40 to 70 people together in one space, and we can do breakout rooms and we can facilitate those conversations. Because I think people are very adept at doing that within their institution. But one thing we offer is kind of that, come work with people you don't know and are at different institutions across different geographic areas. So that's one way we like to use it, but at the very minimum, we like to get it in front of people to do exactly what you two were just talking about of higher ed. I mean, when I was in higher ed, it's not just higher ed, it's not true everywhere. It's so tempting to just, you open Outlook in the morning, you see what you've got coming that day, and that's what you focus on, right? And so in professional learning, if we can just get people to look up and look out for a 2-week program or for an 8-week institute, that alone is really beneficial way to use the Horizon reports, and they do a really good job of giving us the conversation, because like I couldn't make this up, right? Like, I'm not going to come and be like, hey, let's talk about this random scenario Ryan came up with. No, let's look at these because they're data informed, they're community driven. Let's use these to drive conversation. That's my favorite way to use them when we can.
That's a great way. And one of the things I think that is interesting about the report is that we use this big expert panel of, 60 individuals from across the globe. We try to include a very international perspective, as well as a U.S. perspective. We invite folks from all sorts of different levels and areas of expertise. And so we have this very broad set of experts that ultimately have to come to consensus around what are these top trends or top technologies and practices, and sharing their perspectives on the potential implications or impact of those trends or the kind of possibilities that the techs and practices offer. And in that consensus, I think we find this through line that bears relevance for all of our readers, but it is missing that individual, very specific contextualized perspective. And so the activities that you're doing, I think, are very powerful for our readers to be able to bring this back to their institution and talk to their colleagues about what does this mean for us? How is this, how might these trends maybe not apply to us, or maybe we're already on the cutting edge of this, we're using this technology in a very innovative way, and that sets us apart. But it allows that next the report allows that next conversation, or invites that next conversation. Mm-hmm. What are the implications to my specific context? And one of the newer offerings that we've started publishing in the last couple of years is called the Action Plan, and that also that process of thinking about what is the preferred future, thinking about these trends and technologies and practices, and what actions might we take today for institutions to have that conversation, to really push them into action and not just be like, oh, that's cool, and interesting that the digital divide is still widening. cool, but what does that mean for us? Does that involve our faculty? Do faculty have access to devices or bandwidth or, and so I love that you're encouraging that conversation in our professional.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other way that, I don't know that we've done this, but it's, you all are sparking the thought is, we have a couple programs for like executive leaders across, IT, teaching and learning, innovation, cybersecurity, privacy. And how interesting would it be to have those folks take this back to their team, and instead of having your weekly staff meeting that's, hey, what's on the docket this week, but instead you put this scenario on the table and you say, what if, and that's a powerful way to run meetings and to build teams and to create creativity and all those kinds of things, which are topics we talk about all the time. Like, how do we retain more employees? How do we keep people interested? This is a really interesting stuff to think about. And so that could be another way we could use it, is honestly just feeding it towards those people and giving them ideas of how to use it with their teams and on their campuses, to just spark conversation. Because you're right, Kathe, like there's some of these trends. One thing I love about higher ed is if you put this in front of a group of people that work in higher ed, in my experience, they're going to run with it. Like, people in higher ed are so engaged when you give them something really meaningful to work with that feels very purpose driven. It's like my favorite thing about it. And that's what this feels like to me. So I think that's also a fun way. Like some of these trends, it's like, dang, we've never even thought about that one, right? Or, oh yeah, we think about that all the time. What else is on the horizon, right? Because we can get so narrow focused too. So that could be another way we could start to use it this year, especially with those vignettes. So I guess shout out to Mark again on that one, because those vignettes are definitely powerful because they put you in the shoes of somebody, and that empathetic is not always the number one term with research. Like now, I'm a qualitative researcher by trade too. And I'm like, I got to bring those vignettes back in the next article that we put out, because they got me thinking, and I had an image in my head. And so another way to use it is to get leaders using those on their campuses to just drive thinking, I think.
And I am so passionate about supporting folks on campuses who have no authority but are expected to influence, and is such a great tool for those individuals who might not be actually leaders by title or in their org chart, but they're coming with this amazing information that they can share with their leadership. And it's a great way to manage up, to say, hey, leaders, have you thought about these implications on our campus, or here's what I would recommend we invest in or look at or pay attention to. And I know many members I've spoken to are in that position and have used the report in that way. And back when I was on a campus, that was something that my colleagues and I would do as well. So if we can get it in the hands of leaders and get it in the hands of those who, have leadership in terms of their potential influence, I think we'd be coming at it from both sides in a really great way.
Yeah. Well, I'll say a quick aside, and then Jenay, I'm really curious to hear how that AI showed up everywhere and what it made you think as kind of a researcher on this. But the quick aside is I was just reading Morgan Housel's new book, Same as Ever. And in that book, he's basically saying all these things change all the time, but there's a lot of things that never, ever change. There are things that just stay the same because humans are humans and humans continue to be humans. And it was a really fascinating book. But one of the things he talks about is the best story always wins. And so you can go, like you said, if you want to lead up or manage up or lead down, really, but especially leading up, and you go in with all the data and all the numbers to prove that, hey, students are feeling this way, students are saying these things, students are not getting the same, we're not getting the retention. Those are powerful, but the minute you give the story of the student who decided not to come to your institution because of this and this reason, that lands really well and really heavy. And that's, I think, exactly what this report helps to do, right? It really gives the story. And so I think if people can use the story and lean into the story, that makes the report useful for years, really. I mean, I just love that piece of it. So.
Yeah. And go ahead. Well, I just wanted to say, because related to using scenarios for strategic planning, Ryan, when you had asked about which scenario do I plan for, that kind of conundrum. And so as we're talking about how members or how the community can use the scenarios to engage in strategic planning, something that really hit home for me and helped me understand scenarios as a tool. So we kind of alluded to this, but all of us working on the Horizon Report have taken formal training from Institute for the Future. So it's a great organization that offers scholarly-based training in how to engage in strategic foresight. And I took a course with them that was specifically focused on scenarios. And the way they described this was that the 4 archetype scenarios that we use in the Horizon Report, those archetypes are designed to represent the 4 corners of the future. And we understand that the real future will be something in the middle of those 4 archetypes and another element or a bunch of elements that we have not yet even thought to expect yet. And so the way we operationalize this concept with strategic planning is to think about, okay, this piece of our current reality could transform in this way. This piece of our current reality could collapse in this way. This element could grow without any sort of limitation. So we think about all the potential, and then what really focuses that strategic planning is the next step of crafting our preferred future. What things do we want to see grow? What things do we want? What type of constraints do we want to see introduced into our system? What things do we think collapse is fine? These elements, they need to be sunsetted. What transformation do we hope for? And when we start to envision the future we want with the inspiration of the archetype scenarios, then we can plan to create the future that we want. So I just kind of wanted to back up a little bit to answer your question about using those scenarios. I think it's a common question. Are we expecting one of these things to happen? Should we plan for one or the other? And we expect some of this stuff to probably happen, not all of it, and we can plan for what we want to see happen.
That's helpful. Yeah, that goes back to what Kathe said about agency, and you use those to plan what you actually could do, which I love. Thanks for that. I think that's a really helpful piece.
I want to add one more thing, and then Jenay, let's talk about AI and the
What's AI? No, I'm just kidding.
Long to get to it, actually. I just love how you're describing the use of stories as a powerful tool of influence. And the reason I love it so much is I'm thinking about, so I've been at EDUCAUSE about 6 years. And when I came from higher ed before coming to EDUCAUSE, it was all about data-informed decisions and bringing the numbers. And I know that still is largely the case at many institutions. But what I love about foresight, and the Horizon Report is an example of that, is that there are stories that are compelling, and they are, they give shape, but they're grounded in data. And so it's a wonderful combination of both data informed and story informed influence. And I'm just imagining a preferred future where we are making decisions based on stories that are grounded in data, and because it really humanizes what we're doing, right? And it so that we could do some scenarios on that and what that might look like. But I feel like that's a really powerful way of thinking about influence, and thinking about really understanding the potential impact of changes when you're not just using numbers, but you're using stories. So thank you. Right, Jenay.
Now it's time.
It's just about AI.
I like that question, Ryan. I actually had a slide at a recent talk that I gave, but the title of the slide was "What even is AI?" So
it's a good question.
I think it's
a fair question.
I think it's valid. And not just because AI is an elusive technology for a lot of people, but I think more importantly, when we have these conversations with our colleagues, we almost always have different definitions in our minds. You know, are you talking about generative AI? Are you talking about like the broad umbrella of AI technology? So that's for another episode of Showcase of EDUCAUSE Shop Talk. But for now, what was really interesting in that we kind of expected this to a point. We expected to have a lot of AI trends being nominated. What really struck me was, and I went back to the data a couple of times, like, is this really what's happening? Every single trend category had an AI trend nominated by a panelist, at least one AI trend nominated by panelists. And so putting that together, I'll talk about sort of just the logistics. As a researcher, I had to kind of make that decision of, are we going to have an all AI horizon report, or how are we going to handle this? Right. And so what we ended up doing, which I think is going to work out really nicely, was just create a new, we called it an honorary trend category, I think, and put all of those into that category. But what I really hope doesn't get lost in that approach to this is the interconnectedness of those trends that were nominated, and the fact that they span social, technological, environmental, economic, and political trends. So there's that overlap in every area of our lives. So this is, I think, a big signal to our institutions that if you've been toying with the idea of having highly restrictive AI policies, or not teaching students how to use AI, or, if this is kind of the direction you've been thinking of going in, maybe rethink that based on some of these data that are saying AI is in every part of our society, our political systems, our economy, and we need to have an educated society about these tools and how they impact us holistically. And so this is where we get into discussions of being a good digital citizen and teaching students digital fluency, and having good digital fluency ourselves as practitioners, and then also being part of the digital workforce. I don't like to completely focus on digital workforce because, admittedly, it's not applicable to everybody. And also, I don't think it's the most important thing. Just as a human, I think the most important thing is to understand that we live in an increasingly digital society, and we need to be good, responsible digital society citizens and know how to handle all that. So that's my take on the AI mega trend this year. How about you, Kathe?
Yeah, it was interesting to see that they were really sprinkled throughout all of the other broader categories. And as I was looking at all of the trends in total, another thing that stands out is that, and this happens a lot. This is maybe veering a bit away from AI, but this is not uncommon. But so many of the trends could fall in multiple of the steep categories, and I think that the interconnectedness of trends and the potential influence, either from a social perspective or a technological perspective, there's something in there that I think is really important for us to continue to think about, even beyond the way that we've written about them in the Horizon Report. That, for example, we categorized in environmental trends, we categorized increasing demand for green skills. And so obviously that has to do with green skills, and it has to do with the environment, but it also has implications for curriculum and for the workforce, and for, it's beyond environmental, right? Even though it's kind of grounded in environmental. And so I think applying that back to the AI trends, they're both the kind of subject and the object of these trends, that, they might be the thing that impacts other trends, but they also might be impacted by some of the other trends that we have identified. And I know that's a little blobby, but I think, as we've been talking about, how can readers use the report and how might they engage with their colleagues, either on campus or with other members across other campuses, I think those conversations outside of, again, what we've written about based on what the panel contributed, but what might some other impacts of one of the things, I'm interrupting myself a little bit, but one of the things that I loved about the training that I went through with IFTF was an activity where you kind of almost randomly pick trends and you mash them together and you kind of see what happens when you mix them up. Like, what happens when you put baking soda and vinegar together? Oh, they create this kind of bubbly explosion. Well, what happens when you mix increasing demand for green skills and increased demand for learning anytime, anywhere together? Oh, like, what does that inspire in you? And in some ways, that's kind of baby scenario building of having readers think about what might scenarios based on other combinations of these trends or technologies and practices look like beyond what we've written. So I just think there's so many opportunities for really creative interpretations of the ingredients of the Horizon Report that can lead to innovation, that can lead to inspiration and increased resilience in higher ed. And that's really exciting. But we can get back to AI. I know that kind of took us off the AI track, but Ryan, how might the AI trends, are they showing up in your professional learning topics, or were you surprised to see them, or were you like, oh yeah, these are things that or too? And
it's interesting. I think they show up in the same way they showed up here, and I think it's a signal, and I could be way off on this, so pardon anyone who hears this and is like, I don't think so. But to me, the fact that it shows up everywhere could be a signal that we know everything we need to know about it and we understand how it fits in all these categories. More likely, I think it's a signal that we don't really know, but we're constantly being asked about it. We're constantly thinking about it. So of course it's going to show up in all of them because we're not sure where and how it's going to impact yet. And I think, Jenay, you said it earlier, it's everywhere. And, we just, in professional learning, for example, we just had a session the other day, and someone was at an institution, like you were saying, Jenay, that is going with this kind of no AI allowed model, right? That kind of thing. Well, the problem is they are a Microsoft campus, and AI is auto-embedded into Outlook now, and Word, and PowerPoint. I just used it in PowerPoint the other day. It'll help you design the slides. That's not the most advanced, generative AI that's out there, but it's in there. And so this campus now has this AI embedded tool that is everywhere across the campus and a policy that is essentially saying don't use AI. How do you... I'm kind of with you, Jenay. I think the one signal is you cannot ignore this signal. And so in professional learning, that's kind of something we are taking to the table of, we don't really know. We're not going to put together some program to teach you exactly what you should do and exactly what policies you should have because we don't really know. So what we're trying to do is get a lot of people that have thought a lot about it into similar spaces and chat about those things. I think the Teaching and Learning Symposium, that is kind of doing the same thing, right? It's like, we don't have the answers, but we know and have connections with people who can have the conversations in an informed and meaningful way. And can we do that? So that's what we're trying to do, because it's the same. It's kind of showing up everywhere. Like, it's showing up in our management institutes, and it's also showing up in our labs that are very centered around tools, right? So it kind of has the same theme that came out in the report, that it's kind of showing up everywhere. And I think that's because people are playing with it, right? And they're trying to figure out, where is the impact going to be most and where should we focus, which I think is kind of exciting and kind of fun. I think you can look at it as like, oh no, this is really intense and it's taking over everything. But it's also, it's pushing us to really think about new and exciting opportunities. And yes, there are things that are scary too, but I don't know. In professional learning, the people I found that are most open to having the conversations are the ones who are doing really fun work with it and really interesting work with it. So I think that's how we're using it, but we're figuring it out. We're building the plane as it flies a little bit too.
So maybe as one last conversation topic, we could talk about we've kind of talked about this with the AI, but I'd love to hear about like what stood out as a surprise as you were reading the report. Because some of the things you're like, oh yeah, we've been seeing this for a while, or this is a trend, it's a long-standing trend. But what was most surprising?
Jenay, if something jumps out at you, or Kathe, if you have a answer to your own question first, feel free to jump in.
How by asking you guys the question?
I don't know that it is a surprise to me, but perhaps more of just kind of like oh yeah, let's make sure we talk about this a little bit more. And so thinking about the environmental impact of big data tools and large computing, I because I'm steeped in this world and I'm hearing all these talks all the time and I'm at a lot of conferences, that wasn't a new topic to me. But I do know that when I speak to folks who go to one conference a year, or they're in their day-to-day job and not listening to all AI all the time, that is not a topic that gets talked about enough. And so I would think, for me, every time I query one of these tools, one of these AI LLMs or something, I'm thinking to myself, like, that used resources. Asking that computer to answer my question, that just used finite resources in the environment. So it's something I'm just a little more aware of now. And so if there's anything that I think readers might find surprising or like an aha moment, I would really encourage them to dig into that environmental aspect.
One that stuck out to me, and I'm kind of taking one word out of one of the scenarios, but the transformation scenario talks about refocusing on hyper-individualized instruction. And that really hit me, like hyper-individualized, because I've heard individualized for years, right? But throwing hyper in there adds a layer to it. And in my own personal, I guess, passion projects and research and things that I do, I have done a lot of research and have been really interested in actually the negatives of our societal move to hyper-individual. And there are a lot of them in the social research. And so I was actually hit with this, like, I was surprised by the goal of hyper-individualized commitment to instruction mixed with the reality that the breakdown of kind of community and society at a broad level isn't necessarily a great thing. And I was left wondering about the balance. And I don't have an opinion either way, but that was one thing that really surprised me. I didn't expect the report to make me think like that, I think is what surprised me, which in a really fun way. And I hope anyone who picks it up and reads it, similar to Jenay's takeaway too, is like, oh, didn't know that this would have me think about it in this new, different, exciting way, or to pull threads from different places. So that was one that stuck out to me.
I love that. And I'm going to end on a slightly less hopeful note.
Bring us down, Kathe. Let's go.
But actually, I do think it's helpful. And kind of similar to Jenay, it is something that I think our readers maybe are already thinking about, but have the potential to think more deeply about. And the two things that jumped out at me were navigating misinformation and increased opportunity and need to think about data security and privacy. And those are two things that I think are certainly impacted by the rise of AI and the increased access to data. But they're not necessarily something that comes up as often maybe as they might in a teaching and learning conversation, unless you're an analytics expert or already working with big data. And so to me, it's showing how this kind of data is just seeping into all corners of where we live and work in the teaching and learning world, and really critical side effects or potential implications of our use of AI or big data. And that's really important. Well, thank you all. It's been a great conversation, and I love talking about the Horizon Report, and so it's been fun to imagine possible futures and talk about how we might take action today and find the preferred future that we might want.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I love talking to you about these things.